Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Motivation Monday. Back again after a fair recess, and as we head into, well, hopefully coming out of lockdown too, and who knows what we're going into. We need constantly this motivation and this inspiration to keep us going. Absolutely delighted to have with us today Kelda Wood. I remember following her story as she rowed herself across the Atlantic and had the odd tweet reply. So I was sort of quite chuffed about that from the top of a wave and day 43 or something ridiculous. But just thrilled to have Kelda Wood with us today from our home in Shropshire, and look forward to hearing from her. So over to yourself, Kelda Wood.
Thank you, and yeah, it's great to be here. Great to see so many faces, and I guess we could all do with a bit of motivation on a Monday or any other day of the week at the minute. But I think the joy of working from home is, we all get these various distractions, and for me, it's either the dogs barking or the cat walking across the keyboard. So I apologise for any four-legged interference before we start. But yeah, one of the joys of working from home, I think. So yeah, today I guess I really would like to share with you a bit about my own journey since my life-changing injury in 2002, and the challenges that I then have overcome since that injury, and really how that injury has now led on to be one of the best things that's happened to me, and has led me to do some really cool and very lucky things, including the last thing, as Jonathan mentioned, a solo row of the Atlantic, which is just about to start. This year's race is just about to start. So it was 2 years ago that I was just travelling out to La Gomera to get going with that. So yeah, hopefully it will give you a bit of motivation to kickstart your Monday. So I'm going to try and just share the screen. And again, technology doesn't always work on our side, but we've done a pre-run of this, so hopefully it will all be good. I'll just try and go. There we go. Cool. Can everyone see that? All right. Great stuff. Lovely. So yeah, I guess to start back at the beginning, sport was always a massive part of my life. I loved any sport, and it really was my identity. It was who I was and the person that I wanted to be. My absolute passion lay with horses, and my dream was to represent my country and to ride at the Olympics. And I guess that, to start with, was a challenge in itself. I didn't come from a particularly wealthy family. I didn't own a horse, which is a slight technical hitch if you want to go to the Olympics. But my parents were very academic and musical, so they were really pushing me to get my GCSEs. And in the end, the compromise we came to was that if I got 9 A's, they would buy me my first horse. I didn't get 9 A's, but they were good enough to say that I could put some money towards it. I'd saved up £750, which to anyone who knows much about horses isn't a lot of money to buy a horse that is going to take you to the Olympics. But I managed to find a horse. I put the next 5 years of really hard work into him, and we were starting to show the potential to go where I dreamt of going. I rode him at my first international, and things were looking really good. But that was really where the start of my challenges really began, I guess, in that one day I was out exercising him. He shied at a plastic bag in a hedge and shied into the middle of the road and was hit by a lorry that was coming too fast to be able to stop. My horse was killed and I was fairly badly injured. I kind of picked myself up, got going again. I got into racing. I thought my Olympic dreams were over, but things were still going really well. And then I had the injury that really was going to change the rest of my life, because I was haying the horses one morning, and a big square bale of haylage, which again, for those of you that are doing chickens and things, I guess you probably know, they're pretty heavy. They weigh about a ton. And that fell off the top of the stack and crushed me underneath, causing an injury to my leg that really was going to change the rest of my life. Without getting too gruesome, because I'm aware it's only 9 o'clock in the morning, but the bale didn't touch my leg. It fell off and landed clean on top of my head and compressed everything. So it caused a compound fracture and dislocation to my left ankle, which basically means the joint popped out the side door and my foot was on right angles to my leg. So, sorry, Kat, I can see facial pulling there. And then the weight of the bale shattered the bottom of my leg. So for a while, it looked like I was going to lose my leg. I didn't. I had fairly intensive surgery and physiotherapy, but I didn't lose my leg. But I often say, I sometimes think, oh, it would have been easier if I had, which sounds like a crazy thing to say. But the impact of the injury was much more about the impact it had on my mental well-being than it did physically, because my real problem was that no one could see my injury. So I've always been this person that I trained harder, I did more, I worked harder. And all of a sudden, I couldn't run. I couldn't play the sports that I loved. And I felt that people were making judgment. I felt that people thought I was being lazy, I was being unmotivated. And of course, that was everything I wasn't. I just couldn't do it anymore. But I think more importantly, I couldn't accept it myself. So I kept on trying to be the person I used to be, and in my eyes, failing. I couldn't accept that I had a physical limitation that was actually stopping me from doing it. So that had a huge impact on my confidence and self-esteem. And I kind of got stuck in that place for the best part of 10 years. I always say I wasn't unhappy. I was never depressed. I was never diagnosed with anything. I just didn't like who I was. I wasn't happy with the person I was with my injury. And in 2010, I recognized that I really needed a challenge. I needed to do something that was going to try and kickstart me out of this bit of a rut that I got in. So I decided to climb Kilimanjaro. I didn't tell them about my leg. But we summited, but the actual trip did the opposite to what I'd hoped, because I felt that everyone was laughing at me for going slowly, cursing me for falling over the whole time. But it wasn't until the very last night when people actually came up and said how much it had inspired them to keep going, that if I could do it with one gammy leg, they could sure as hell do it with two good ones. And that really made me realize that I needed to change my attitude towards my leg, and I needed to start focusing on what I could do instead of what I couldn't. So I decided to come back and I began retraining as an outdoor instructor. And the more I got involved in the outdoor industry, the more I worked with people instead of horses, the more I realized that there were a whole heap of people that were stuck where I'd been stuck, that really were struggling to move forwards on the back of a life-changing injury, illness, or trauma. And that led me to set up the charity Climbing Out. So I set Climbing Out up in 2010. We became a registered charity in 2011. And Climbing Out runs 5-day outdoor activity programs aimed at rebuilding confidence, self-esteem and motivation in people who've been through mental and physical trauma. At the beginning, we really were focused around outdoor activities. It was about promoting that real adapt and overcome. You know, despite what you've been through, how can you adapt to still get out there and do things and find your thing, whatever that is. We weren't about turning people into outdoor instructors, but we were all about motivating people to find their thing that would help them move forwards. But as my own journey continued, I realized more and more that it was about mental resilience, not physical resilience. And the way I describe it is that if your mental well-being is like a tabletop, and that tabletop, for it to work, it needs table legs to hold it up. Now, I always said, no one told me what those table legs were. And I really wish they had, because I needed them. And I really got fascinated by the whole mental resilience coaching, life coaching side of things, but with a real view to keeping it real. I saw a lot of work being done where, you know, we promote this positive attitude, but reality is when you're going through challenges, sometimes it's just not possible to be positive. So my take was very much, how do we keep this real life? How do we relate this to real life? So we started delivering the table legs on the Climbing Out programme, but really appreciating that everyone was an individual. Everyone's on their own journey. Everyone needs slightly different shaped, coloured, fitting sizes of table legs. So it was really about promoting and raising awareness about the table legs, but then chatting things through with people to say, how does this table leg relate to your life? And we've been working with a huge number of people now over the last 10 years. Initially, we began working with people aged 16 to 30. But then what we realised, we were being contacted by a lot of people who were over 30 who said, I really need this, but I'm over 30. So last year, we actually extended our age range and started supporting people over 30 with huge success. The results were mind-blowing. And so this year, pre-COVID, we had such an exciting year ahead of us, because we actually were extending our services even further to support the emergency services and the military. But as a result of COVID, we're now working and supporting the NHS as well. So we've massively extended the support we're offering. We've had over 350 people through the programme now. Everything was sold this year, but we've a full schedule of programmes lined up for next year. What this year has also taught us is how to really, stand by our whole ethos of adapt and overcome. So this year we couldn't deliver the 5-day programmes. We ran one in August, which we fully adapted to COVID with huge success. So we know we can run the programmes, we can run COVID adapted programmes next year, which is really exciting. But we also looked at how can we keep sharing these table legs when we're not running the 5-day programmes. So we developed a series of podcasts, of videos, and we've been running online workshops to really share these table legs, which what we've learned is that that's enabled us to reach a lot more people. And that can only be a good thing. So we really see now that the 5-day programmes are kind of the gold standard, but we can still have a much wider reach, but at a lower level through the podcasts, the videos, and the online workshops. So we've actually grown. We've really grown and strengthened through COVID, which has been fantastic. And I just wanted to share with you this little testimonial from one person who came on our programme a couple of years ago. Thank you for pressing my play button and taking my life off hold. That just sums up Climbing Out for me. It's about helping people move forwards. And the support doesn't stop after the 5-day programmes. We really recognised that it needs to be more than just those 5 days. So we now have a Climbing Out club that offers follow-up work. We have 4 weekends a year where we get together. We offer a level 2 and a level 3, which is a walking and climbing programme in Scotland, a canoeing expedition in Scotland. So there's real long-term friendship, development, and a network of support. And for me, the most important thing with that is that it creates sustainability. They're not reliant on Climbing Out. They're actually doing it for themselves and supporting each other. And that makes it much more long-term than if they were looking to Climbing Out the whole time. So I'm incredibly proud of what Climbing Out is achieving, and will keep doing in the future. And I guess at the same time, my own journey was still progressing as well. In 2014, I was selected as a member of the GB Paracanoe squad, aiming for the Paralympics in 2016 in Rio. And, if I take you back to that kid that dreamt of being an Olympic horse rider, to be representing my country, that's at the World Championships. There's photos from the World Championships. So to be in a boat with Kelda Wood and the GB flag in my GB strip was an incredibly proud moment. And I guess the learning for me was, life doesn't always work out how we planned. Maybe I was always destined to be an Olympian, but it was just in a boat and as a para-athlete rather than on a horse and as an able-bodied athlete. And after the World Championships, my sights were firmly set on Rio. I truly believed that I would be at the Olympics. And I truly believed I would win a gold medal. I had to. I'd been dreaming of it since I was 4 years old. This was just what was meant to happen. And I was within touching distance. This photo was taken at the Rio training camp just before the games started. Behind this photo, that's the regatta that both the Olympic and Paralympic races took place on. But it just doesn't quite work out like that, does it? Because at the final selection regatta, with just one place available for Rio, I was beaten by 1.5 seconds. So as soon as I didn't pass that line in front, as soon as another boat was in front of me, that was my Olympic dream over. And that was a really tough time, really tough time. And I guess I had a choice then. I wanted to just roll over and give up, but I knew that wasn't who I wanted to be. But for quite a long time, I was really stuck. I wasn't quite sure what my motivation was. I wasn't sure what my goal was. I wasn't sure what was next. But what that time taught me was to really trust in my journey, because while I was stuck and kind of working out just what to do, I was then introduced to a guy called Martin Hewitt from the Adaptive Grand Slam. And the Adaptive Grand Slam were attempting to be the first disabled team to do the Mountaineering Grand Slam, which is the 7 highest summits in the 7 continents, plus the North Pole and South Pole. 10 days later, after speaking to Martin, I was out in the Alps on a training expedition, planning to attempt a summit of Aconcagua, which is a 7,000 meter peak in South America, the highest peak in South America. Now, that expedition in the Alps didn't go well. My leg wasn't great. Well, I say it wasn't great, it was pretty blooming awful, actually. I ended up non-weight bearing in a huge amount of pain. And most of the guys on the team said she's never going to do it. Now, fair play to Martin, he was still prepared to give me a shot at Aconcagua, but he said I had to work out how I was going to make it possible, because doing it how I tried to do the Alps, which was just walking on my leg, wasn't going to work. And that was when I really came up with my motto, which is, it's not about saying I can't, it's about saying how can I? And I love that, because what I've found since I've started asking that is that when you start saying, how can I, there's always an answer. And it's very much the attitude that we promote to all the guys coming through the program with Climbing Out. And it was my whole ethos of the row with the Atlantic as well. But I started applying it first with Aconcagua. So I kind of said, how can I make Aconcagua possible? How can I make it possible for me to summit a mountain of this size? It wasn't simple. I tried an awful lot of things that didn't work. But 2 weeks before flying out to Aconcagua, we found these crutches. So these were my answer. They were specially adapted. They were a special shape, so I could use them going uphill as well as downhill. They were a special material that would stand sub-zero temperatures. They had ice screws and snow baskets on, special padding to protect my hands because I was going to be using them for such a long time. And the straps on the collars are so that if I needed to use my ice axe, I could use my ice axe without dropping the crutches. I was so excited about these crutches. I hadn't had a chance to use them in extreme environments because they only arrived 2 weeks before, but I was really confident about the difference these crutches would make. So I turned up at the airport, all very excited about showing off my new bits of kit. And before I knew it, I was up out in the mountains. And what I really realized there was it wasn't just about the crutches. it wasn't going to be the crutches that were going to be the only thing that would make it possible to summit. It was about my attitude. So I struck a deal with myself that I wasn't going to let anything stop me other than things that were out of my control, which would be the weather, the altitude, or injury. I also struck a deal with myself that I wasn't going to whinge, I wasn't going to moan, and I wasn't going to be the weak link. I was the only female on the expedition, and I was the only non-military person. So I really had to prove a point as well, because they all thought, you know, military, I hope there's not too many military people here listening in, but, you know, they all think civvies are way less capable than them, and they definitely thought at that point that women were far less capable than them. So I really wanted to prove a point. And it was an incredible, incredible trip. And it was the thing that changed everything for me moving forwards. Because when we summited, with both the crutches and that attitude combined, I got to the summit, 19th of January 2017. And it was literally that moment that I stepped onto the summit that everything changed for me, because I found a peace and contentment in the person I was with my injury. But more than anything, I realized that I didn't need a gold medal to define success. Success really was about me being the person I wanted to be. It was about my attitude. And I felt very, very lucky to have found those answers, because I spent 15 years, you know, really not happy with who I was. So I knew, even walking down from the summit, I knew that I wanted to do something bigger, to really try and inspire others to find their own answers. Because I don't believe we can find the answers for people, but I do believe that we can try and support, encourage, motivate people to go on their journey that will enable them to find their own answers. And when I came back from South America, I very quickly made the decision that that next thing was going to be a solo row of the Atlantic. So this was the route across, 3,000 miles from east to west, from La Gomera in Tenerife to Antigua in the Caribbean. And I guess people often say, like, why? You know, you could have just climbed another mountain or whatever. But I guess the really important thing is to say that I had absolutely no burning desire to row the Atlantic. I'd never rowed before. I'd never done anything on the sea before. And I hated the idea of doing it on my own. But that was why I had to do it, because it had to be something that was so far out my comfort zone that people would listen, that people would pay attention. And the whole reason I was doing it was to try and inspire and motivate. The whole reason I was doing it was to try and promote that how can I message. So to do that, we needed people to listen. So it had to be something a bit out there. And if I was successful, I was going to be the first para rower to complete it as a solo. Other paras had done it, but in a crew. So it really was going to give us the platform to shout as loud as we could about those aims and to inspire as many people as we could. And, you know, in the 2 years leading up to the row, it was a pretty amazing journey, and I got to meet some incredible people who went above and beyond to make the whole thing happen. It was also a very overwhelming journey, and there was a lot of times where I really questioned whether I could do it. And I still felt like that when I was out in La Gomera. So 2 weeks before the race starts, it was all kind of beginning to happen. And I suddenly realized I was going to have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And that was a pretty scary moment. None more so than the morning of the race start. And I really considered running away that morning. There's a ferry that leaves from La Gomera to Tenerife. And I just thought I could go and jump on that ferry now and just kind of wave as I disappear into the distance, and I would never have to do it. But then I had to remind myself why I was doing it, because each day I was on the ocean, I was rowing for a different young person who'd been through mental and physical trauma. So over 76 young people had written and shared their stories. And every day we were sharing their story on social media and through the website. And the row was as much about them as it was about me getting across that Atlantic. And I also felt they had no choice. They couldn't jump on a ferry and run away. You know, what they'd been through, they just had to stand up and face it. And what kind of example was I to them if I ran away? You know, how could I ever expect them to listen to me again in the future if I wasn't prepared to see it through? And that really was what gave me the motivation to get in the boat and start rowing. So before I knew it, I was rowing across that start line. And it really was quite a surreal moment, because I had this absolute feeling of, what am I doing? I mean, I really didn't have a clue. That as I was getting in the boat to start, I got the bow and the stern, which is the front and the back of the boat, mixed up. And one of the guys who runs one of the ocean rowing courses was stood on the harbour wall that you can see, laughing at me, going, "Oh my God, Kelda, you don't even know the front and the back." You know, it didn't bode well, really. But, you know, you just get in the boat, you follow the processes and you start rowing. And before I knew it, I was rowing away from land. I got to my first evening, it was going dark. The seasickness started, and I had 24 hours of pretty violent seasickness where I'd ended up on sea anchor because I just couldn't row. I was curled up in a ball, just unable to move. And it was a pretty overwhelming feeling of, I can't do this, but I can't not. And that was a very strange place to be in. And I really felt quite trapped at the time. And that feeling continued into the row, really for the first 12 days, to the point that I actually was trying to work out a way of breaking a bone. I would have to be rescued. I knew I had far too much pride to quit. I couldn't quit, but I really felt like I couldn't do it either. And my only answer was, if I break a bone, they'll have to come and rescue me, and that will get me out of this without having to quit. Luckily, I wasn't brave enough to break a bone either, so my only option was to keep rowing. And I guess once I got into the third week, I'd started to create a real routine. And what I found was, instead of thinking of another 3,000 miles to go, another 10 to 12 weeks out at sea on my own, I just took one day at a time and I just followed that routine. And I followed the routine with absolute discipline. And slowly the days started to tick away. And before I knew it, I was on day 20, and then it was day 30. And you kind of create a new norm. I guess a lot like we've done with COVID. You know, at the beginning of COVID and lockdown, it all felt so overwhelming and so impossible. But now we're not saying we're enjoying it, but we've kind of created a new norm, and we're just getting through each day, taking one day at a time and creating this new normality. And that really worked for me out there. But the solitude was without doubt the hardest thing. I, funnily enough, was just looking through my logbook the other day, and on day 3 I wrote, "I want to be anywhere else other than here. I just want to go home." That kind of, again, it's not great when I'm writing that on day 3 and there's still another 11 weeks to go, but I wasn't always on my own, because I had a visit from Santa Claus on Christmas Day. So that was my bit of company for Christmas. And then on the right, that is actually MP and Hardy, which were my Wilsons of the Atlantic. They were my constant companions. We had many a deeper, meaningful conversation. They saw a side of me I hope no one else will ever see out there, but it's amazing how real life they can become when you haven't seen anyone for a very long time. And I was also lucky enough to have some real life company too, because I was joined by a minke whale for just over 48 hours. And I'm hoping this little video plays with the technology of Zoom, but I managed to catch him very briefly. So hopefully this will work. This morning, there was flash lightning, pitch black, flash lightning, and I had a whale swimming along at the end of my, oh, there he is. I hope you got that. So that is Herbie the whale. I had to give him a name when he stuck by me for so long. And I love this photo because to think that that is in the middle of the Atlantic. You know, it's not in a zoo, it's not in a marine estuary, that's just in the middle of the Atlantic. And as I say, Herbie stuck with me for just over 48 hours, which was incredible. It also brought his challenges, because on the first night he began to become what I thought was quite threatening. And I actually started to question, you get a bit illogical when you're out there. I started to question whether he was actually a shark instead of a whale, and was he actually eyeing me up for tea? So I'd called Atlantic Campaigns, the race organisers, and just said, you know, he's really getting quite threatening. Should I be concerned? And they said, no, don't worry. He probably just thinks your boat is another whale and he's performing a mating ritual. So that didn't give me a lot of comfort at the time. But there was some great, I began to talk to Herbie regularly, and I would wake up from my sleeps and just hear him blowing through his blowhole, which was amazing, and a very, very surreal experience out there. And people often say to me, you know, what were your best moments? What were your worst moments out there? Herbie was both of them, some of the best and some of the worst. And there were some incredible moments. I had a flyby from a French naval aircraft. So this was a photo that they took when that happened, which was amazing. There was an electrical storm one night when I turned off all the nav lights on my boat, and there was just flash lightning, 360 degrees all the way around the boat. And, you know, you don't get much more solitude than you do in the middle of the Atlantic. With your own electrical light show is just, again, an amazing, amazing moment. There were some incredibly challenging moments too. One day my satcoms failed completely. So I had 3 phones out there and the whole of the network went down. And this was at a time when I still felt very, very vulnerable. I was relying on my weather reports. I was relying on getting advice. And also it really helped me keep my sanity, just to speak to people. And suddenly I realized all means of communication had gone, from the phone to email to messages. I was totally on my own. And that was probably the worst day out there, in that I realized no one was going to even realize there was a problem for at least 7 days. And that's a fairly daunting position to be in when you're in the middle of the Atlantic. I was about 1,500 miles from the nearest land at that point. So yeah, it was a scary 24 hours. I managed to get 1 phone working. The other 2 didn't work for the rest of the crossing, but 1 phone did, and luckily it lasted for the rest of the crossing. I had another day when I was stuck in a localized storm, and I couldn't row. The rain was coming down so hard that it was just filling the boat with water. You couldn't even step out in it because it was coming down so hard. It was just smacking into everything, and the sea was like a washing machine. And I had to spend the whole day sat in the cabin. It gets so hot. I couldn't make any water. I couldn't make any food. And that for me was such a tough day. I didn't mind when I was rowing. I didn't even mind when I wasn't making much distance, but the days when I was stuck in the cabin and couldn't row were incredibly frustrating. And although there were a lot of challenging moments, there were a lot of good moments too, although I didn't really kind of take those on board until I was back on land. The funny thing was that through all of it, all I could do was keep going. All I could do was keep rowing, and I really had no choice in that, because when you're in the middle of the Atlantic, it's very hard to quit. I often say it's easier to, I think it's tougher to complete a marathon than it is the Atlantic, because actually it's so much easier to quit. So mentally, I didn't have a lot of choice other than to keep going. And I got to day 71. So I was about 5 days from Antigua. And it was at that point that things actually got really tough. They were probably my toughest 5 days, because all the other boats had finished. And knowing that I was the only one out on the ocean was really tough. But also the winds had changed. I'd got caught in a pressure system and it had blown me too far south. And I'd been told that I was in danger of missing the island. So it had been a miserable 5 days where I was being beaten by the wind, beaten by the waves. And with those 5 days to go, I actually asked to quit. And I guess the big learning for me was that my whole message, really, I was okay with quitting, in that the message I thought was that as long as you've given your best, sometimes it's okay not to succeed. And I was happy that I'd given my best, but actually I haven't, because what I really realized was, as soon as I acknowledged that it was really tough, as soon as I acknowledged that I wanted to quit, I actually then realized that I wasn't going to let the sea beat me. I got that same attitude as I'd had on Aconcagua, where I was going to do everything I had to do to finish. So I rode my backside off for the next 5 days. I got to within 24 hours of the island, but the sea still wasn't done with me yet. And I don't tell you this story to try and make it sort of melodramatic and sort of make myself out to be a superhero at all. The reason why I tell this story is to show how absolutely weak and pathetic and unstrong and negative I was out there, because I just wanted it to end. I just wanted to give up. I thought I couldn't do it. I had every negative thought in the world. And I guess my big learning is that it's okay to have those thoughts, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it. Because I got to 1.5 miles of the finish line. I'd been rowing for just over 24 hours with 2 20-minute breaks. I was done. I was absolutely done. But they told me that I was still too far south and I was going to miss the finish line. And I didn't know what else I could do. I didn't think I had a single thing left. But I actually ended up getting both hands on one oar. I locked the rudder hard round, and I had tears running down my face. I was screaming in frustration with every stroke. But somehow that boat just creeped over the finish line. And I always feel, when I say, oh yeah, and we crossed the finish line, like it's a bit of an anticlimax, like it should be a good sort of whoop, whoop moment and lots of celebrations. But actually it was just a feeling of complete relief that we'd got there, crossed the finish line, and that it was over. And then as I read that the finish line is just out from the harbour, and I have to say, as I rode into the harbour, it was a pretty special moment, because there was an unbelievable moment unbelievable welcome waiting for me when I got there. And this is the moment that I arrived. Just find it again. Ooh, hold on. Let me go. Try again.
Celebrations fit for a champion. Kelda Wood makes history as a new queen of the ocean. First the smiles, then the tears, as she's embraced by her sister, who's travelled from South Tyneside to meet her.
So I always feel that that looks like a real glory moment. It actually wasn't at all. It was incredibly personal, incredibly inward for me, because I really felt I'd been very open about sharing my weaknesses and my vulnerabilities out on the ocean. And what I really helped was it wasn't the flares, it wasn't the music, it wasn't the celebrations that would inspire people. It was actually sharing those weaknesses, sharing that self-doubt that I'd had. And I guess that's far more relatable to everyday life. So my hope was that that was what would cause the inspiration, not the 3,000 miles that maybe people thought if I could keep going out there, maybe they could keep going too. And my point in sharing my whole story with you, especially that time out on the Atlantic, is to just share that learning, that it's okay to think you can't do something. That doesn't mean you won't. It doesn't mean you can't. And I think hugely for me that it's okay to sometimes be negative. The key is not to stay in that negative place for so long. We all have a choice. I was very aware I was choosing to be negative out on the Atlantic. And sometimes we need to, you know, when I speak to a lot of people when they're really going through tough times and they need to spend a little bit of time just feeling negative and almost wallowing in a bit of self-pity, because it is tough. But it's about recognizing that when I was ready, I could make the choice to stop being negative and to get on with things. So I think my big message, my big learning, whatever you want to call it, is that we all have to take responsibility for our actions and for our choices. It becomes very easy to blame things. I see a lot of people trying to look outward and blaming. A lot of us have done it through COVID. You know, how wrong has COVID been? How much has the government got it wrong? How unfair is it all? Actually, it is what it is. It's what we do now, the choices we make to make the best of the situation that's important. So I guess, you know, if this is Motivation Monday, I would say, you know, what's your motivation and what choices, what actions are you going to make, are you going to take this week that can make this week the best it can be, and can make it the best for others as well. And I hope that does just give us all a bit of motivation to get out there and do things that maybe we think we can't, and to make the best of whatever situation we're in right now. Thank you, Jonathan. I'll unshare.
Oh, Kelda, absolutely fantastic.
Sorry, I've gone over time there.